Hello, beautiful community. So Jubilee is screwed as a constructive forum for public debate. Let's talk about why. Quite a few of you asked me to watch the recent Media Sound debate on Jubilee, and I watched only parts of it. So I shoved it into my face, and now without thinking about what I want to say to you, I'm going to shove my face into yours, and we'll see what comes of it. One thing you've got to put on the table straight away is that people come to the table of politics from very different backgrounds, with different beliefs, with different images about how they want their politics to go. And you have to eat shit at the table of politics if you're an effective and responsible citizen. You don't get to choose who you share the table of politics with. You can get off the table of politics only if somebody is threatening violence or making political proposals that are such that they would actually not be compatible with a stable and peaceful sustenance of any political order at all. They're to that extent too violently self-refuting or too exclusionarily self-refuting. You can get up. But short of that, it's not very easy to see how you can get up, no matter how offended you are, because your only options really are to secede or to emigrate. Otherwise, stopping engaging with fellow citizens who you find offensive isn't going to stop them from carrying on being not just offensive, but politically effective with their offensiveness. Having put this on the table, we also have to understand that many forms of public engagement are counterproductive, are corrupted by functional purposes like clicks and cash, and have deleterious disinhibiting effects, whereby they don't generate extra aggression out there in society, but they tie free-floating aggression to particular unconstructive political expressions. So let's say a little bit about that. Now, most Clickably, there was a guy in the debate who self-identified as a fascist and gave a green to yellow light to political violence against groups he didn't like in society. How do you deal with that? What do you do about it? Well, let's straight away put another layer down, and that's that functional layer that I mentioned. The central function of Jubilee is clicks and cash. That's never going to generate a productive discourse. I mean, look at this channel. It is lamentable in its orientation toward clicks and cash. You can overlap to some degree, right, and have constructive discourse that gets some clicks and cash. But you fundamentally, if you want to be in this game in the long term and help people, as opposed to use people, you've got to be ready to sacrifice quite a lot of clicks and quite a lot of cash. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So that functionally straight away puts Jubilee in trouble. Because the best way to get clicks and cash is not so much to deepen polarization, but to give, if you like, raw meat to the audience. To give such a degree of sensationalism that is actually politically anesthetizing, it's depoliticizing, it's entertainment, it's consumption of a commercial product, not consumption of a political view. So we can't get away from this thing functionally. Now, something else that's very important is that in democracy, you can go wrong not just by articulating certain very unconstructive views, you can go wrong by asking certain questions, right? So if I go around asking, why don't you eat your hamster? Well, actually, I think there are good reasons not to eat your hamster. But I think that it's a good question to keep on asking and re-asking. That way, even if my answer keeps being no, the very asking of the question has a disinhibiting effect. That's why people who deeply empathize with the psychology of the folks who engaged in, for instance, January 6th, who empathize enough to understand that these folks thought they were consistent with a kind of revolutionary, liberatory tradition in US politics, which is genuinely there. But for all of that empathy, there is still the conclusion that once you transgress in a certain way, after the transgression stops, there's a kind of an ineliminable chink of doubt that you've left in connection with a particular democratic institution or a particular democratic ritual. There are certain things you can do in a church space that once you stop doing them are still going to sort of contaminate the experience people have in that space. They're going to struggle to engage in their church activities there in quite the same way. So there is such a thing as raising questions that shouldn't be raised too many times, no matter what answer you give them, right? And that's damaging. What's the mechanism by which it's damaging? Well, it makes it easier to ask why not, right? If you've undermined in speech by putting it into question so many times the value of counter-majoritarian institutions, why do we need the courts? Why do we really need elections? We can just have one and then stop. Why do we need an independent media? Asking that too many times, contrary to what many philosophers would think, well, no, if you're asking the question, it's a great opportunity to give it a rational justification. Well, no, people don't believe in these things because there's a rational justification. They believe in these things because they have certain kinds of pictures of them in their mind. And every time you ask questions about these things, it's like a watercolor that's got water being splashed on it, right? It's being watered away, it's being washed away. And then it's easy to ask, well, what the hell is wrong with a leader of a country telling a court to go screw itself and disobeying whatever the court tells them to do? So there's a very dangerous disinhibiting effect there, simply in virtue of aerating certain hypotheticals, aerating certain questions. And the way this works is that there is a great deal of free-floating aggression in society that is not politically expressed. But by putting certain political options on the table, or by asking questions that stop disallowing certain political options, you allow that free-floating aggression to take a specific political form in people. That's what happens when you get millions and millions of views of a clip where somebody engages in fascist rhetoric. It doesn't create aggression in society. It doesn't create the instinct on which such political positions are predicated. That's there. You're not going to create it easily by saying a few things. But what you are doing is that you are shaping that instinct into a political stance by helping people associate that instinct with particular thoughts about their institutions or about what should be done to certain enemies within, as it were, and so on. So I'm running together two thoughts here. One's about disinhibition, and the other is about the mechanism of how disinhibiting speech politicizes citizens into unconstructive views, not by generating an aggressive instinct in them, but by framing it for them, by housing it for them in a house of political thought. And then there is, I think another layer worth putting on the table, and that's that debates inherently imply equalization. It's very difficult to avoid equalization in debate. That's one of the reasons why one of my heroes, Bernard Williams, at the end of his life was skeptical about his public appearances because of the equalizing effect. If you debate somebody on the radio and you're 4 times more insightful than them, it's virtually impossible for that to come across, because debates have a 50-50 quality generally. They psychically hit people in a 50-50 way more, right, than ought to be reasonably proportionate. And even if you're not engaged in debate, then the stuff that comes before you and the stuff that comes after you still has a certain kind of equalizing effect. And this happens not just at the level of sort of raw meat consumerist polarization of the form Jubilee offers. It even comes with sort of highbrow radio and TV programs that are becoming increasingly rare. There is, for instance, if you're interested in philosophy, an episode of a program called In Our Time, hosted by Melvyn Bragg for many, many years in the UK, where there's a literature professor and a philosophy professor debating what an individual is. And the philosophy professor completely obliterates the literature professor to the point that it's almost cringeworthy to even listen to the program without hiding under your bed as you listen to it. The philosopher is Richard Wollheim in this case. But I think to the average educated listener, it's just like 2 thoughtful people sharing their perspectives. The utter obliteration that would be visible to the initiated observer is invisible in virtue of it being a sort of debate, whereby Richard Wollheim was saying that the notion of individual is less of a social construct than one might think, and the literature professor was unsurprisingly saying it was more of a social construct than one might think. So the kind of inherent equalizing effect that debates have, which is why I am personally skeptical of debates, and I may well do some, but so far when I've been invited into debate formats online, I've said no. Partly because either I'm going to do not so well, let's say my health is not good on the day, and there's going to be a bizarre equalization effect, or I'm just going to completely eat the other person alive, or even spoil the debate by not feeling the other person is up to it, and saying that. And again, that will not generate a good content. So there is this equalizing effect. So these are some of my reflections. Does that mean nobody should ever go on Jubilee? No, I think it's a personal choice, but it does mean that you have to adapt and try to undermine the format, if you like, when you go. Does that mean we should demonetize Jubilee? Well, no, because who would be demonetizing Jubilee? Potato chip companies, right? It'll be Google or Facebook or wherever else these clips appear. Well, this will just be an arbitrary decision that could then leak into demonetizing all kinds of more constructive platforms. So no to that. No to the idea that nobody should ever go on it as long as it continues to exist. But it's interesting, what would Mehdi have done if he'd had a chance to go back again and redo the debate he did? Would he have done it? And how would he have handled it differently by trying to undermine the format, as it were, use it against itself in a way that was very difficult, because plainly he was surprised by a lot of the things that came up during the course of his discourse with these 14 people, or however many of them there were. So, a couple of cents from me. Lots of love.